In 2004, a young man from Chicago walked into the music industry wearing a pink polo shirt and a backpack, and told everyone he was a genius. Most people laughed. Nobody's laughing now, but not for the reasons he expected. Kanye West spent 20 years building one of the most remarkable careers in American music. He won Grammy after Grammy. He changed how hip-hop sounded. He built a fashion empire that made him a billionaire. At his peak, he was collaborating with everyone from Jay-Z to Paul McCartney to Adidas. And every single thing he touched turned to cultural gold. And then, over the course of just a few years, he lost almost all of it. This is the story of how that happened. Not the tabloid version. The actual story, told in order, from the beginning. To understand how far Kanye fell, you have to understand how high he actually was. Kanye Omari West grew up in Chicago, raised primarily by his mother, Dr. Donda West, an English professor who believed completely in her son's talent. He started making beats as a teenager, selling them to local rappers, and eventually found his way to Rockefeller Records as a producer. He made beats for Jay-Z's The Blueprint in 2001, which became one of the most celebrated rap albums of that decade. But Kanye didn't want to just produce music. He wanted to be the artist. When The College Dropout came out in February 2004, it sold 441,000 copies in its first week. Critics called it a revelation. Here was a rapper who didn't fit any existing mold. He wasn't a gangster, he wasn't a battle rapper, he rapped about college debt, his mother, and his faith. He sampled soul music, he wore clothes that most hip-hop artists at the time wouldn't have been caught dead in. He followed it with Late Registration in 2005. Then Graduation in 2007, which famously went head-to-head with 50 Cent's album in a sales battle that Kanye won decisively. He sold nearly 1 million copies in a single week. By 2008, Kanye West wasn't just a successful rapper, he was the most critically respected musician in hip-hop, and many would argue in all of popular music. The first signs that something was wrong came in 2007. In November of that year, Kanye's mother, Donda West, died following complications from cosmetic surgery. She was 58 years old. By almost every account from people who knew him, her death devastated him in ways that never fully healed. He channeled that grief into his fourth album, 808s and Heartbreak, released in 2008. It was completely different from anything he'd done before. Mostly auto-tuned singing, sparse electronic production, almost no rapping. Critics were divided, fans were confused, but in retrospect, that album influenced an entire generation of artists, from Drake to The Weeknd to Post Malone. Then came September 13th, 2009, the MTV Video Music Awards. Taylor Swift, 19 years old, had just won Best Female Video for You Belong With Me. She was mid-acceptance speech when Kanye walked on stage, took the microphone from her hand, and told the audience that Beyoncé's Single Ladies video should have won instead. The crowd booed. Taylor Swift stood there in silence. Beyoncé looked mortified. That moment aired live to millions of viewers, and the backlash was immediate and overwhelming. Even President Obama, in an off-the-record comment that later leaked, reportedly called Kanye a jackass. Kanye apologized publicly, on The Tonight Show, in an interview, and reportedly in person, and most people eventually moved on. But something had shifted. For the first time, Kanye's ego wasn't just a funny character trait. It had hurt someone on live television. The years from 2010 to 2016 were in many ways Kanye's most creatively ambitious period. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, released in 2010, is still considered by many music critics to be one of the greatest albums ever made. It was massive in scale. Orchestras, guest appearances, 9-minute tracks, an 18-minute short film. Rolling Stone gave it 5 stars. It was the rare album that somehow lived up to its own hype. Then came his marriage to Kim Kardashian in 2014, the launch of Yeezy with Adidas, and a string of albums that, whatever people thought of them personally, kept him at the center of the cultural conversation. The Yeezy line was genuinely extraordinary as a business. Sneakers that retailed for $200 were reselling for $1,000 or more. In 2022, Forbes estimated that his Adidas deal alone was generating roughly $1.5 billion in annual revenue. But by 2016, something was noticeably wrong. In November of that year, Kanye abruptly canceled the St. Pablo tour. mid-run after a series of erratic onstage rants. He was hospitalized at UCLA Medical Center shortly after, reportedly suffering from what was described as a psychiatric emergency. He was held for 8 days. When he came out, he seemed different. In April 2018, Kanye West posted a photo on Twitter of himself wearing a red Make America Great Again hat and declared his support for Donald Trump. The reaction was volcanic. He then gave an interview to TMZ where he suggested, and these are his words, that 400 years of slavery in America was a choice. The TMZ staff, almost entirely black employees, pushed back on him directly and on camera. It became one of the most uncomfortable moments in recent celebrity interview history. His longtime collaborators distanced themselves. John Legend wrote him a private letter urging him to reconsider his public positions. Kanye posted the letter publicly on Twitter. Some observers pointed to his documented struggles with bipolar disorder as context for his behavior. Others argued that diagnosing someone's political views as symptoms of mental illness was its own problem. The truth is probably somewhere more complicated. That mental health, grief, yes men, fame, and genuine ideological shifts were all happening at the same time, and it was nearly impossible to tell where one ended and another began. The moment that ultimately destroyed Kanye West's business empire happened in October 2022. Over a period of several weeks, Kanye made a series of public statements that were openly anti-Semitic. On Twitter, in interviews, in appearances, he wore a White Lives Matter shirt at a Paris fashion show. He posted things online that major platforms ultimately removed for violating their policies. The response from the corporate world was swift, and by celebrity standards, almost total. Adidas terminated the Yeezy partnership on October 25, 2022. Gap ended its Yeezy Gap collaboration. Balenciaga cut ties. His talent agency dropped him. CAA dropped him. Foot Locker stopped selling Yeezy products. The documentary he'd made with MRC was shelved. His deal with a production company fell apart. Forbes estimated that losing the Adidas deal alone knocked him off the billionaire list. His net worth reportedly dropped from somewhere around $2 billion to somewhere in the hundreds of millions almost overnight. Adidas spent months trying to figure out what to do with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Yeezy sneakers sitting in warehouses, eventually selling them off and donating a portion of the proceeds to anti-hate organizations. Even for people who had watched Kanye with some sympathy over the years, this was different. The statements weren't ambiguous, they weren't misquoted, and the brands that had stood by him through years of controversy drew a clear line there. Kanye West is still making music. He still has fans. His earlier albums still get millions of streams every month, and they probably always will. But the version of Kanye West that existed for most of the 2000s, the one who made Gold Digger and Stronger and Runaway, the one who seemed to be in a constant, exciting conversation with the rest of culture, that version is essentially gone. What's left is something harder to describe. A man who is clearly still talented, clearly still troubled, and clearly operating without many of the people around him who might have once said, "Wait, stop." Whether you see him as a cautionary tale, as someone who needed help he didn't get, or as someone who simply made choices and faced consequences, probably all three are partially true. The question worth sitting with is this: when someone famous unravels in public over the course of 2 decades, what responsibility does the audience have in what they watch, what they share, and how long they keep watching? If you've been following Kanye's story for years, I'd genuinely like to know, was there a specific moment when you felt things shift? Drop it in the comments below. And if this kind of deep dive storytelling is what you're looking for, subscribe. We do this every week.